Nor. Now, going into round 9, which we're looking at right now. We're going to only take a very brief look at this. This will be the very first loss that we're going to take a look at of mine in this full series. Don't worry, we'll look at quite a few more losses after we're finished with this Continental Championship. It was my only loss of the tournament, so there weren't really any other losses to look at. Yeah, there weren't any at all. But after this, this would be the last session of the Continental. And then the next session that we do, which is scheduled for 2 weeks from now, the 22nd, we'll be looking at a new tournament where you guys will see a little bit more of my human side, perhaps, if you haven't already in these games. So going into round 9, I would still tie for first place. Now with a couple more people, I think it was now a 3-way tie for first place, if I remember correctly, going into round 9. As I mentioned, I had already secured my Grandmaster norm. So quote unquote, the goal was finished. Of course, at this point, with only 3 rounds left and being tied for first, I clearly knew that there was a high chance that I could qualify for the World Cup, which was simply just a top 4 finish. And not only that, I had found out in the middle of the tournament that winning the tournament actually would get immediately the Grandmaster title. Now, remember, at this point, I was only 2380. Okay, at the time of this game, because of the rating games I've made throughout the event, I was maybe 2415 or so. And now I had 2 norms. Okay, so going into this game, I had 2415, 2 norms. Definitely at a high in terms of my chess career at that point, just making my second norm. But okay, now I had some bigger aspirations, qualifying to the World Cup, and potentially, if I win the tournament, even the Grandmaster title immediately. And so even though I knew those things and knew I should still be aspiring for more in this tournament, I still had some complacency, and I still was kind of satisfied. And whenever you find yourself in a state of being satisfied with where you are at, whether it be the tournament, whether it be your chess success, whether it be anything, honestly, your education, anything, whenever you're feeling satisfied, that's when life gives you a kick in the butt. And that's exactly what this game is right here. I was playing Georg Meyer, who some of you guys might know, 2600 GM. He represents Uruguay, but he's a German Grandmaster. And first time playing him, obviously a very, very strong opponent, very strong player. And I had the black pieces. So definitely a little bit of an underdog this event, but I was feeling so good about my chess that I thought that, I still should have some good chances. At this point, I was performing 2700 in the tournament. So I wouldn't say that I was lacking confidence going into this game. However, one thing I was lacking was kind of a perspicacity, which is basically I was just satisfied. I was satisfied, and I was a little bit complacent going into this game, especially with my preparation. And so that's what we're going to take a look at mostly for this game, because by move, I think it was even 10, 15, I was already nearly completely lost. The game ended up going 4 hours, many moves, because I was just trying to fight back. Finally realized that, it's not okay to be complacent, not okay to be satisfied. But at that point, it was too late. Okay, so let's take a look at this opening, try to find the moment where I could have improved, and then we're going to move on to the next round's game after I kind of explain this one a little bit. All right, so my opponent starts with knight f3. Now, as we saw in the previous game, I think it was not last week, but 2 weeks ago or 2 times ago. I don't exactly remember when it was, but when I beat the Grandmaster Leila Stanley Martinez with the black pieces, I had played against knight f3 to move c5, basically saying that if white goes e4, I'm very happy to go into Sicilian. As some of you guys should know from previous weeks, I'm a Sicilian player, and so I'm very happy with his transposition. Instead, Meyer goes c4, totally okay. I was prepared for this, or at least for my previous game, prepared for this. Knight c6, knight c3, knight f6, g3, d5, take, and here in this position, if our opponent goes knight takes d5, would actually transpose into the Stanley Martinez game. Okay. Now going into this game, I had seen a couple of games from the database where Meyer had played bishop g2 as he played g6, and here I think he had gone queen b3 instead. In the game he went queen e4, but in previous games he had gone queen b3. I think he had even castled, and for those specific variations, I was pretty well prepared. I mean, when your opponent plays a game in their database, you should definitely be prepared for that. If your opponent plays multiple times, but even only one time in a very specific line that you're trying to target with, you should definitely be prepared for that. So on queen b3, on castles, I was prepared for those variations, prepared for those lines. However, because like I said, I was feeling satisfied, I was feeling complacent, I didn't do a deep dive into this variation as I normally would do, and look at the other side variation. For example, queen a4 as my opponent Meyer played. And the thing about being prepared, especially for this tournament, which is only one game a day, which means you have plenty of time to prepare, there's no excuses to have lack of preparation. And especially because this was one of the first times I had played this. I had played this variation previously when I was in this tournament, but that game was actually the first time I had played c4, c5, or c4, c5 variations. Usually against the English, 1c4, I would play knight f6, or I'd play c6, go with the Slav. So this was the very first tournament that I was using the c4, c5 structures. So I definitely did not have any prior knowledge from, past years, past tournaments where I'd played this before. So because of that, I needed to be absolutely sure that these variations, these side variations, were covered. All right. And once again, because of my complacency, because of the satisfaction where the tournament was at, I did not do so. And now I got punished. This being said, if you ever reach a point in an opening position, at this point, I think it's move 6 or 7, let's say 7, and your opponent surprises you, or it goes for a variation that you don't know, what should you do? You should take a deep breath and start to think, right? You have to start thinking. You don't know the variations. And one thing that's very easy to do in these moments is to bluff. And this is what I used to do, actually, very often. I would bluff. I wanted my opponent to know that I was also prepared and that he didn't catch me off guard, because I didn't want my opponent to have that psychological advantage that, he outprepared me. But that was more so just my ego speaking. In these moments, when you aren't prepared, you aren't familiar with what the lines say, you absolutely have to take that deep breath, that moment to start to think. Okay, so I played bishop g7, very logical move, and now my opponent hits me with queen c4. So the idea is clear. I mean, white's attacking the knight, white's attacking the pawn, asking black how should look right. Right? Now, so already at this point for black needs to start to be a little bit careful. With best play, black is equal, maybe even slightly better if black plays the most testing variations. However, as I said, in that 2 moves, I was in big, big trouble. Okay. So this is going to be our first stopping point. It's one of those moments where we're putting ourselves in the position of being surprised. We're putting ourselves in a position of not being prepared, let's say here. And black is trying to find the best way forward. Okay. White's putting the test with queen a4, queen c4, a little bit unorthodox, but still an interesting idea. Okay. So black to play here. Remember to send your answers to me directly in the chat. We're going to take 2 minutes on this position to try to figure out how black should proceed. We have a few options, a few tempting options. And I want you guys to try to decipher which ones might be the best. Okay, so 2 minutes, everyone. Try to find black's best continuation. Remember to try to give variations or at least words to support your idea, what your plan is. Instead of just giving me one move. Okay, and remember, everyone send it to me directly in the chat, as to not as to allow your other classmates to consider the position. We'll give it another minute and a half, minute and 30 seconds. Okay, so I'm seeing some interesting ideas in the chats. I'm going to. Okay, this is actually not the most important point, and so I'm not going to call anyone for this particular moment. However, I'm going to address a few of the ideas that people mentioned. So knight takes c3 is definitely one option. Now, the reason why I did not want to play this was because now white would capture back with a d pawn. Still attacking c5, so something I have to meet. And now this bishop is free. So I did not want to allow white to develop the bishop for free or with tempo, if possible. And even still, it is kind of hard to defend this pawn. For example, queen d6 or queen b6 can even be met with bishop to e3, developing the bishop with threat on the c5 pawn. It's just slightly annoying. So knight takes c3 is a fine move. Black needs to be a bit more careful here, but I just didn't want to allow the bishop to come out. So I just opted not to play this move. Another option that I saw, which is very interesting, and also one that I considered during the game, was bishop to e6. bishop e6, basically pawn sacrifice. And after queen c5, rook c8, and we're basically saying that white's wasting time with queen a4, queen c4, takes c5, does not justify the extra pawn. However, here, actually, we don't really have necessarily a strong threat. I guess we're throwing knight d4 ideas, so maybe white cannot castle. But I think here, actually, white could get away with, could white get away with, probably white can actually take on, not d5. This is actually one of the things I did consider. Queen b5, yeah, someone's mentioning queen b5 to me as a move, and I think this okay, very good. And queen b5 was one of the things that I was worried about, because now we actually cannot move our knight to, let's say, b4 or d4 to take advantage of the misplaced queen. White's now threatening to get castled and will be up a pawn, a center pawn at that, and also the b7 pawn is being threatened. So just not quite queen 2 or this bishop e6 rook c8 idea is just not quite working. It's decent. There is compensation here. Black does have some activity, but I think it will dwindle if we're not careful. And I think it's simply not enough. And so the last option that many people gave was actually knight db4. And so this is how we're going to continue. After knight db4, obviously white cannot take on c5 because of knight c2, winning the rook on a1. And so white castles. Very simply, castles, gets out of the way of it. Okay, so now we have to still defend the c5 pawn. And there's a few ways to do it. I absolutely did it in the worst way possible, and you guys will see that soon. But hopefully you guys do not play the way that I play. And instead, I want you guys to find the best continuation. Like I said earlier, if black is careful, black can actually seize an edge, a slight edge here. And when your opponent is playing something like queen a4, queen c4 with a very superficial but kind of annoying threat on the c5 pawn, if you respond in the most accurate way, if you respond in the most principled way, oftentimes you will leave the position with a slight edge. And so that's what will happen here if we are careful. Okay, so this will be a second stopping point and the last stopping point of this game before we move on. And so I'll give everyone another 2 minutes here to consider this position and to consider what black should play here. Okay, so black to play, once again, answers to me directly in the chat, and we'll see. I might call on some people after the 2 minutes, depending on the answers given. All right, so 2 minutes. All right. I'm going to give everyone 30 more seconds before we discuss the position, and I think I'm going to call on someone, but 30 more seconds, get those answers in. Yes, please do remember to private message. Once again, just to give your fellow classmates an opportunity to think individually, so as to not influence others' decisions. I am going to call on Vishva. Okay, Vishva, could you please explain your answer?
So I played queen b6, and the idea was to protect the c5 pawn. And the only scary move for white is maybe knight a4, and black would play. Yeah, black would play queen a6, and if queen takes, knight takes, and then the knight protects the pawn.
Very good, very good. And how do you feel about that resulting position afterwards?
I think it's a better Indian.
And why is that?
Just we have, like, our pieces are better, and the bishop on c1 is stuck.
Yeah, basically white has not really successfully done much in that resulting position. For those of you who weren't able to follow, Vishwa is suggesting queen b6, defending the c5 pawn. As many of you mentioned, if we're able to defend the c5 pawn, afterwards we could then follow that up with bishop to e6. So queen b6 threat is bishop to e6, developing the bishop on c8 with threat on the queen on c4. And if knight a4, which is the scary move, and it's the reason why I called on Vishva, as opposed to some others who gave queen b6, is that others who gave queen b6 didn't necessarily see the move knight a4, which is the reason why I did not play the move queen b6. So there are some other tempting options. TY actually laid out basically all the illegal moves, or legal and reasonable moves that defend the the pawn on c5. Perhaps one of the moves that you did not consider was actually knight a6, though this is not so much, or this is not as appealing as some of the other moves. As it turns out, the computer actually says bishop d4 is fine. I don't really understand it. I don't see why we cut this darks for bishop, but this is not a very human option to me. So queen d6 is an option, but after queen d6, actually immediately falls to knight e4. So for those of you who gave queen d6, I don't think we have as adequate of an answer to knight e4 as we do to knight a4 in the other position. Another move given was queen a5, also a logical move actually, and it's not really much of an issue here. There is some annoyances with knight b5 perhaps. The queen on b6 also is it is just a better place. It also gives options of knight a5 as well. And so queen b6 is a slightly better version of queen a5. And the only thing you have to be worried about really is the move knight a4. And as Visha gave, one thing to do when you're worried about a move and its tactical values, even though you think it's strategically good, look for calculate. Look for options. Give yourself options, and look for the resources that make your strategically sound moves available. In this case, even though it looks like we're losing a pawn due to this fork, queen a6 is a very, very nice resource that saves the pawn for us. Someone's asking me about instead, what about knight e4? So knight e4 is actually quite creative because now after queen a6, there's no knight hanging on a4. But actually here after queen c5, now we can take on e2. And we're trading this c pawn for this e pawn, leaving the d3 square weak, attacking the knight. And yeah, okay, I was just like having a deja vu moment thinking there's knight d6 here, because after it takes rook e1, but the queen on c5 is hanging. So this obviously does not work. But okay, yes, the move is queen d6. Oh, someone's saying rook e1 first. I should know this possible, huh? So wait, one second. Before we continue, I do want to address this. Queen a6, queen takes c5, and then I wanted queen takes e2, now rook e1, with the idea of knight d6 following. This one actually is reasonable. For this one, I suspect actually we can just drop the queen back, and after knight d6, king f8 takes. d3 is being threatened. c2 is also being threatened. We're threatening some potential discoveries. It doesn't look too good, but I think actually this is quite good for black. Hard to stop knight d3. This queen is kind of misplaced. The bishop on c1 is not in the game. Even though the king on f8 appears misplaced, we do have ideas of playing bishop f6, king g7 to fix the king's position. So a bit strange, but actually I think it works out. Okay, so that's a little bit of a sidetrack, but queen d6 is the move. Now let's find out what I played, which, yeah, the move that I played is honestly inexplicable. I will say that I would characterize my style of play, especially mostly in the past, but okay, also in this game, as trying too hard to be creative and conjure up ideas that are not strategically sound. Okay, so I played the move b6. All right, now it's obviously the most quote-unquote safest option to defend the pawn on c5 because, okay, when a pawn is defending another pawn, a very, very safe option. But this clearly opens up the diagonal to my rook. And so my thinking when I play the move b6 is that even though I'm opening myself up to this diagonal and potential tactics, as long as I don't miss any tactics, then it'll be okay, right? Because my next move will be bishop a6, bishop e6, bishop b7. And I think I just had a few moments of hallucinations during the game and simply miscalculations. There really was no excuses for the reason why I played this move. I simply just miscalculated quite a few things, and I was just not on good form in this game. And so I'll quickly show you guys how the game went and some of the things that I had miscalculated. So a3, very logical move, which takes the knight and makes these discoveries on the knight and the rook very, very nasty. Now, I was not in such bad form that I missed a3, believe it or not. And so my idea was bishop e6. And on queen b5, no, I did not miss this move. My idea was a6, queen a4, b5. And after queen d1, I just could not believe that there was also some other things that required calculation, but I don't want to get too much into them. but I just could not believe that I completely forgot about this move, queen d1. And now I thought knight d5, and boom, knight g5. Very, very nasty idea, which is very typical when the bishop on e6 is misplaced and there's no pawn on h6 preventing this idea. So now, very simply, the bishop on e6 cannot move because of the knight on d5, and I cannot play moves like knight takes c3 because of the knight on c6. And so basically, I'm forced to forfeit the bishop on e6. And in fact, I even have to take it with the f pawn. So I play rook c8 and took with the f pawn. This is kind of only continuation to defend the knight. I mean, I could also go queen d7 as well. But regardless, I have to take back this bishop with the f pawn, which is just so, so ugly. Not only am I losing bishop pair, but I'm also doubling my pawns. And I think you guys know, I'll basically see this as very, very bad. And I suffered for the rest of the game. Like I said, the game went 4.5 hours long. And a lot more chess was played, but I eventually lost. This type of disadvantage against such a strong player like Mr. Meyer was insurmountable. So, moral of the story here: do not be complacent, especially when it comes to opening preparation. When you have the time, I mean, sometimes in these Swiss events, CCA events, whatever it might be, you don't have time to prepare, and so that's a whole nother story. For that, you just have to simply be prepared, do your homework before the tournament. And if you don't, then okay, you'll reap the benefits, or you'll reap the the losses. But in a tournament like this, where it's one game a day, you have the luxury of preparing for your opponent a whole night in advance, the morning in advance, and you make such an error, or I made such an error, to not check simple sidelines that are very possible to be played from your opponent, then these things will happen, especially when you aren't on form. At least for this game, I was kind of not really on form and in the right mindset, the right mind space for this game, because, like I said, I was satisfied, I was complacent, and honestly, in the back of my mind, I had this mentality that, okay, even if I lose this game, it's fine. I came here and I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish, which was getting the GM norm. That's just such a bad mentality. Okay. When you think you're on a free roll, where basically you think that you've already done everything you need to do in a tournament, whether it's be you make national master, whether it's be you made FIDE master, made it IM norm, GM norm, and hopefully for some of you guys, let's say you even made the GM title in that tournament, right? Why feel the need to be complacent? And so I really wish I could go back to this game, change my mindset, change my psychology towards how I approach this game, because I do truly believe that I was playing good chess overall in this tournament. And, I would have liked to believe things would have been a little bit different had I approached the game with a different psychology. So once again, one of the approaches that I'm doing these 2023 experiences with is the mindset of, how do we approach chess? How do we put ourselves in the best psychological mindset to succeed? And these are kind of one of the mindsets that really held me back in this game, as well as some other tournament games that we'll see. Okay, so and those will come a bit later on. All right, so that was it for this game. And now we'll move on to round 10. So we'll take a little bit closer look at round 10, the middle game play, that is. I ended up winning round 10 against another grandmaster, and so we'll take a look at that. And then we'll take a very quick look. We'll take a very quick look at the round 11 game, which was which will have a whole other can of worms, but we'll see that. Okay, so that's it for this game. And let's continue on. All right. So round 10. Okay. Against Grandmaster Barrientos from Colombia. All right. So going into this game, I obviously knew that a win would be very, very important to getting back into the tournament standings. I had dropped from first place to all the way down 50-ish grandmaster. I knew this was a very important game. And with the GM norm behind me, with the loss behind me, I was in a very good mindset towards this game. And I had a very good mindset towards this game and how I would. So can you guys hear me now? I see some people said that I was logging out. My apologies. But I was in a very good mindset towards this game. I had put the loss behind me, got a good night's sleep, was able to play some sports to reset, and it was a whole new tournament for me. And that's a very good thing to do, actually, when you have that type of loss where really it was a very avoidable loss, right? All it could have taken was a different choice on move 7, and it would have been a whole different game, a whole another game. All right. So um, that's what we'll see here. All right. So 1c4. One thing that I think distinguished me very well for this tournament, and at this point, I had 6.5 points out of 9. So 6.5 out of 9. I had 6.5 out of 8, lost the round 9 game. So I have 6.5 out of 9. Okay. So one thing that distinguished me very well this tournament was actually the flexibility that I showed in my open preparation. And I think it was very, the flexibility and diversification. So I had already played one game with e4. I believe I had played a game with d4 as well. Maybe I didn't show it, but I had played a game with d4. And now I played a game with c4. Okay. So as you guys, most of you guys are masters, key to masters. I don't think we have any IMs in here, but as you guys start pushing for further levels, it's very important to actually try to diversify if possible. At least put yourself in circumstances where you can practice different structures. This is one thing that I wish I had done earlier on. It's not for everyone, I will say, but for me, I think I was able to do this earlier on if someone had pushed me towards doing that. For the most part of my chess career, I would exclusively play the closed Sicilian. I would exclusively play e4, e6, d3 against the French. Basically anything that I could to avoid preparation, to avoid having to put the hard work in. And so this tournament, I was clearly working hard. I was feeling pretty strong about my chess and decided to play the English. So it was not one of the first times I played the English, but this tournament, I was feeling like some diversification really would add a whole new level to my game. And here I did. I played c4. Okay, so knight f6, knight c3. I won't get too much into the opening, except for the fact that a big decision to play the English on move 1, c5, and actually very similar kind of structure, c4, c5, as some of the previous games we've seen with me on the black side. Knight f3, e6, g3, going for the fianchetto structures in the English. My opponent goes b6. A little bit of a sideline, one that I had actually faced before. I don't know if my opponent had seen, but one that I had actually faced before. Bishop g2, bishop to b7, castles, bishop to e7, and black basically will go for a hedgehog structure. All right, so black will go d6, knight bd7, castles, like a6, queen c7, these types of developing ideas. So, okay, I go d4, trying to take some space in the center. My opponent takes back. And here, actually, I made a very interesting decision. I was actually prepared going into this game for this specific moment. My opponent had played this e6, b6 structure before against this specific fianchetto English. And I had the option here to either take with the knight or the queen. Taking with the queen is actually the most played move. And it does lead with, in most lines, to white having at least a comfortable position, sometimes even an advantage, sometimes even much better position. But I very much so like the position after knight takes c4. And we'll see the types of positions that we'll get in this game. And so this was kind of one of those decisions that you make that if you're very comfortable with the positions and you like the following positions or the positions that follow in the middle games, sometimes it's okay to choose a slightly inferior line, one that is not played as much and perhaps is not as tested as much, is not as analyzed as much, if it means that you'll get yourself into a position that has all right, sorry, I'm cutting off the chat for now. I'm cutting off the chat for now, at least to everyone. All right. So if it leads to positions that you are comfortable with, okay, if it leads to positions that you're comfortable with and you feel that you can strongly play and you know the ideas and you feel like you can put practical pressure on your opponent, that's what I felt like I had here. I felt that I would be able to very much so put practical pressure on my opponent. All right, let's look at how the game proceeded. So takes g2, takes castles e4, basically kind of like a Moraxi structure against the hedgehog structure without the lights move bishops. So a little bit different. d6, b3, securing the c4 pressure point with the move b3. There's no pressure along this diagonal as we saw in the previous game, thankfully. Queen c8. All right, so queen c8, perhaps going to b7 to pressure this other point, maybe going for d5 ideas because the knight on c3 is loose. So I go f4. All right, not necessarily reacting to these ideas quite yet, expanding on the pink side, going for ideas like e5, maybe f5, knight b7, queen f3, securing the e4 square, securing the knight on c3 against any b5 pushes, as well as maybe some knight c5 to pressure e4 as well. Basically, so what I'm doing so far is just getting my pieces to where they belong, to squares where they can support the necessary pressure points that my opponent's going to be looking at, and completing my development, essentially. Rook d8, g4. Okay, and this is exactly why I chose this opening. I chose this opening because I knew the dynamic and the practical kind of pressure I would be able to put in my opponent. E4, F4, G4, right? So far, all that white has, so far, all black has been able to do is develop the pieces, set up a relatively solid structure, whereas white has been able to really push towards G4, F4, going for ideas of E5, F5, and even G5. And actually, right now, already G5 is starting to trap this knight. G6. Okay. So G6, a very important move. Otherwise, G5 would trap the knight. I go G5 anyways. And now knight H5. All right. So this is going to be our first stopping point. I quickly went through the opening. It was mostly just developing moves. Perhaps the G4 move could have been a stopping point, but this is the first one that I really want to take a look at. And it is a move that I felt was very strong practically, put some good pressure, and had a very good idea behind it. There's a few good moves here that do prepare strong ideas for white. And so I wouldn't say that there's specifically only one good answer here. But that being said, in these types of positions, you do need to be a man with a plan. You do need to have a plan, have ideas, ways to improve your position. Because if you don't, what black will do with your potentially overextended position, right? I mean, white really has extended very far with their space advantage. So moves like a6, b5, moves like d5, moves like e5, moves like h6 even. All these moves potentially ruin white's overextended pawn structure. So white does need to have some plans. White does need to have some methods of improvement. And so that's what we're going to look at right here. Okay. So let's give it another 2 minutes. All right. 2 minutes. Try to conjure up, come up with some ideas, some plans for white. All right. And now I have actually limited you guys to only discussing it with me directly. So I don't even need to mention no answers to everyone in the chat. All right. So answers to me in the chat. We're going to give it 2 minutes here before we reopen up discussion. All right. As I said, there is no specific right answer. I mean, there are some wrong answers. I mean, I didn't necessarily see anyone with wrong answers. There are some wrong answers that you could have given here. But there were some good ideas that I saw. Some that just simply said, let's just develop bishop b2. Let's go rook a d1, rook a c1. That's not bad. That's okay here. However, black is preparing with a relatively strong threat. All right, so I'm going to send it over to Owen Levine. If you could tell us what your answer was, what you were potentially worried about, and how you decided to play here.
Yeah, so I did knight d e2, so if e5 I have f5, and I probably have knight g3 ideas too.
And what would knight g3 potentially open you up to?
The h file for attacking.
Exactly. So, for example, if black were to play knight takes g3, you would play h takes and open up the h file if you wanted to. Oh, okay. Owen's back to it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that is what I played. Like I said, some of these other ideas were okay. However, a move like bishop e2, I would be very careful with playing. I think it still is okay because after e5, you could play knight de2. But I did not like offering this to black as an option to get counterplay. And one thing that I was trying my best to do in this game is to be the one who was putting practical pressure on my opponent. Now we'll see I wasn't too successful in this. My opponent played quite well to get counterplay. But if we allow black to get e5 without removing this knight, then with e5 coming, these pawn trades would be made. Black would have ways to target g5, target e4, the e5 square. So with knight d2, After e5 now, we have f5, and this is crushing. So I chose knight d2. It's a very practical and very safe and strong option. Okay, so let's continue on. My opponent goes bishop f8. Okay, so now I do oughts to bishop b2. It's time to get developed. There's certain moments where if you feel your opponent doesn't have a strong idea, it is time in those moments to complete development to make sure your pieces are where they need to be. Okay, so now my opponent goes a6. All right, so black at some point needs to come up with a concrete and clear plan for how they are going to come up with counterplay. If they do not do so, at some point I will start to steamroll black with ideas of knight g3, with ideas of simply developing rook on a1 to d1 or c1, and then the fact that I have this long diagonal at my disposal. At some point, I will be able to attack black with sheer force, knight g3, rook h1, those types of ideas. So black comes up with their own plans, very, very typical in these structures, a6, with a very clear idea to play e5. Okay, very clear idea to play b5. And honestly, not very easy to stop. Not very easy to stop. So I'm going to give everyone another 2 minutes here to come up with potentially some ideas of how to either stifle the move b5, prepare against b5, or maybe any other ideas that you might have. And it's a very similar moment to when I played knight d2. There are a few decent options here, but we're looking for practical play. We're looking for ways to apply pressure and ways to improve the position. Okay, I was overall very happy with how I practically played in this game. And so even though I didn't always play the objectively top computer move, I think practically I played in a very, very succinct and clear manner. And so that's what I'm looking for in your guys' moves, to be practical, to also have clear ideas behind them, and give some variations when necessary. All right, so another 2 minutes in the chat, send your answers in, your ideas in, and then we'll discuss. Okay. So I'm starting to see a lot of answers pile in. Thank you for your ideas. I'm starting to see a little bit better than at the very beginning of class, where some people would just give one move lines, one move answers. So seeing some ideas, very good. I'm not always going to be able to call on everyone. So, just, feel whatever your answers are, I'll try to address the general ideas and the general kind of plans here. So a lot of people gave rook c1, a solid move, certainly. Though actually potentially not even stopping b5. For example, rook c1, b5 might even be still possible. Now, probably black instead just goes queen b7 to prepare b5 and get the queen off of the file. So not entirely sure if rook c1 does prevent b5, b5 will still be countering. And at the end of the day, we sort of do need to realize in this position, b5 is going to come. A lot of people try to put a4 in, but this move I don't really like so much, because now the b3 pawn becomes weak. So for example, knight c5 is actually a very, very annoying move that could potentially come in here. So here I decided, and we'll go now pull on, who was the first one? A lot of people actually gave this answer. The first one actually was Vihan. Or Vihan. Okay, Vihan, what was your idea? Maybe they cannot unmute. Okay, so not Vihan, but let's go instead to JR. No, I don't know who that exactly that is, but JR. What, yeah.
So I thought 91 would be best here because after he goes b5, then we have rook c1. Even if we go rook c1 here, you said we can't play. He can still play b5. He might still be able to play b5. So we can probably just go knight d1 to try to reroute our knight to maybe g4, so that we can have more attacks against the chain. Maybe f5 might be playable in the future. And also we open up the a1 to h8 diagonal, so that if he plays bishop g7, then we can play bishop takes g7. So after knight d1, b5, rook c1. If he plays b takes c4, then we play rook takes c4. And after queen b7, we play knight a3, and we'll play knight g4 next. Or
Very
f5.
interesting.
Thank you.
Very interesting, and that's how the game virtually went. And so thank you, JR. So here we have a very interesting idea in place. Now rook a1, like I said, it's a fine move. Even knight g3 here, even f5 is potentially okay, though f5 I didn't like so much because it allows knight e5 with tempo and allows black's pieces to sort of get active. And so we have a very interesting practical play and practical manner in place here, which is we're trying to get an attack going. What do we want to do when we want to try to get an attack going? We want to bring our pieces into the game, okay? Now on c3, it's very far from the game. And I actually had a coach not too long ago. I currently don't have a coach, but some time ago, he explained to me this very interesting development plan, or kind of like development priority, which I had never heard about actually, but I should have kind of understood this. And the question he asked me was, which pieces should you improve first? Or like something along those lines of which pieces should you improve first? And then I was very confused by this question because it felt like such a general question. I was like, I don't know, I should improve the pieces that are bad first. Like that's what I first said. I was like, okay, I should improve the pieces that are bad first. And he's like, no. And I was like, okay. And so it was a very general question, very vague question, but this is the answer that he gave me. You should improve the knights, and then the bishops, and then the rooks, and then the queens, or the queen, unless you have multiple queens. So I was like, what? Okay. And the reason why he gave this answer was based on the movement of each piece. If you want to improve your knights to the most ideal square, then it takes the knights the longest to get to that ideal square. Now, once again, this is general. This will not always be the case. Sometimes your knights are already in the best square. Sometimes your bishops are already in the best square. So that means you improve the rooks. Or maybe sometimes improving the rook to an open file creates an immediate threat. This is just a general thing, a general idea. So I was like, okay, that doesn't make too much. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, actually. And so improve the knights because they take the longest, and the bishops because they have the second slowest movement, and then the rooks, and then lastly the queen because the queen can very easily get to where they need to go very quickly. And once again, this is a general rule. Don't kill me if there's a game that you followed this rule and it didn't work out. But here we see this in action. Okay, c1 is a move that we can play at any time. And actually, sometimes rook wants to go to d1. Maybe you want to stay on the a file if we do end up playing a4. Who knows? But one thing for sure, now in c3, it's blocking the bishop. It's probably not in the best square. It can get picked by some pawn moves. And it so much so would be better on e3 to support c4, potentially hop into g4, potentially prepare f5. So yes, knight d1 is the move that I played and the move that I was very proud with in this game to play. Someone mentioned, so I already approached f5. Someone mentioned e5 as another move. I don't necessarily think that there's a problem wrong with e5. My actual issue with it is that I don't necessarily think that it's kind of I don't think it's attacking anything, or I don't think it's preparing anything for white. I mean, you could be trying to play 94, but then what? I don't really like blocking the bishop. And okay, let's see. Well, for one, I have some suspicions against the move. Like, for example, what if I just take it and then take again? I don't really see why this will work. They're saying that here they're playing with 94 instead. Okay, but then what? I mean, it's an interesting idea for sure. But let's say, okay, it's interesting for sure. I mean, let's say here I go like rook a7. Well, not, I don't know, maybe not so good. I think I actually had considered this during the game. I mean, it's been a while since I played this. I think I had considered this during the game. But, okay, let's say, I think it's not that bad, actually. Like I said, there was a couple of options here that I think weren't so bad. But I have a feeling that there maybe is something here that black has. This is fine. Some people are saying like knight takes f4 or taking an f4. I don't really like this too much because, for example, after takes, Take 6 takes. Well, now you have to defend f7, only move rook e7, and then I think you're getting kind of crushed here. If I'm not okay, maybe this works out. I mean, this is all very, very skeptical. The idea after knight f6 is take 6 and then e5. Wow. Okay, all very complicated. Yeah, I mean, maybe e5 is okay. But it kind of is in this type of positions. A lot of moves are tempting. E5, f5, knight g3. In general, the slow ways of improving will be a trump factor. For example, knight g3, also a move that I considered during the game. But for example, after knight g3, it's not a bad move. I think it's one of the top moves. Let's say takes and takes. Now b5. And the thing is that white's not checkmating. I mean, white's not checkmating in the next like 2 or 3 moves. And so because white did not prepare for black's counterplay on the queen side, for example, after like take 6 takes, maybe it's a free pawn, but at the same time, I don't believe in white's attack anymore in terms of the checkmating prowess in the next few moves. For example, a move like d5 even, bishop G, okay, not bishop g7 now, but bishop g7 eventually with knight f8, so there's no h7 ideas. So here, for example, like queen c6, just kicking the knight back, let's say to, I don't know, maybe c3 or maybe go a4 is probably a little bit better option. And, you know, now a bishop g7 or bring a rook to c5. I don't know. I'm not, it's been a while since I've analyzed this, but I think when I was thinking about this position, I was not so convinced in terms of the, for example, knight c5. Already there's a lot of counterplay that black has on the b3 pawn, on the e4 pawn. And it's kind of one of those actually like Benko-ish, Benoni-ish structures where white has the extra 2 A and B pawns, but they can be weaknesses for the temporary or the time being, and something that black has to, or black can target and white has to be worried about. Okay, so let's go back to the game because we're nearing the end of our time. We'll go a little bit long today. You know, I do want to finish up the continental series before we can get on to some other good stuff next time. So instead I chose the knight d1. Many tempting options here once again, but as a baseline, it's very strategically sound to improve pieces before you make some very dynamic and very kind of decisive choices in the position. Unless you're absolutely sure of your calculation, you're absolutely sure of the prowess of your attack, and you feel that doing it now, absolutely now, is the way to go. Sometimes that's the case. So b5, and now I went to knight e3, b takes c4. I played rook a c1 to take on c4, or I basically just played rook a c1 to, actually, if I recall, rook a c1 was a very kind of stupid move. And the reason is because when I played rook a c1, my idea was after queen b7 was to take on c4 with the rook. And then when I actually got the position after he played queen b7, I was like, I actually don't want to take this with the rook. And so then I took with the knight. So I will admit, you know, there was some psychological kind of mishaps at this point in the game. I think I probably should have taken the rook, but there was a lot of things calculating that I had missed. And I'll show you guys what I missed. And that will be the last stopping point of today because the game actually finished after that. We'll see. You guys will see. So I played knight takes c4. The reason being is because after d5 takes, right? I mean, black needs to continue on this energy, continue on creating counterplay. So black goes d5. Takes. If black plays queen takes d5, I actually don't have to take, and I can play, for example, rook fd1. And now if black takes, what do we know here? Good piece, good piece, good piece, good piece, pretty good piece, bad piece, okay piece, kind of bad piece, not really in the game. It's one of those end games where white is dominating. And I was very happy going to this, and I think white is actually very close to having a significant edge, significant advantage. And so instead, black plays e takes, and my idea was, okay, I play knight a3, I target this, I have control of the d4 square, there's no d4 ideas, I'll simply go knight g3 next, I'll go knight g4 next, I'm even threatening f5. Actually, at this point, after I played knight e3, I had to use the restroom. I immediately got up, went to go use the restroom, and as I was using the restroom, I always do this. I mean, I'm sure almost everyone here does this. I'm like thinking about my position, and I'm like, wow, so my position is so good. Okay, I don't know if you guys do that, but I was doing that. I was like, wow, my position's so good. Like I'm trying D5, I'm doing knight D4, bishop D4, F5, knight G3, knight G4, and I was like, wait, what happens if rook E4? Because I'm trying to think about ways for my opponent to get counterplay. I'm trying to think about ways that my opponent can even fight back because I thought my position was just so dominant. And I was like, oh, shoot, rook E4. And that's what he played, rook E4. Now I can't move the knight on E2. My opponent can go rook AE8. My opponent now can even go D4. Everything that I thought was going well for my position all of a sudden was collapsing in my mind. And I actually started panicking a little bit because I was like, what have I done with my position? As we saw a few moves ago, it seemed like I was dominant. It was one of those hedgehog positions for white where it seemed like I got everything I wanted. My pieces were where they belonged. My opponent, yeah, he got a little bit of counterplay, but I thought we had dealt with it. That's on H5. I'm doing H5. And then I was like, man, I just missed this rook E4 move. Because actually, I will be honest, from this point, we're playing knight to D1. I had seen all the way to knight E3, e takes D5, knight E3, and I was like, yes, I'm very happy there. So I was at knight D1, B5, knight E3, then rook C1. Here I was like, okay, I could take with the rook or the knight, but if I take with the knight, then D5 takes, knight E3, I was like, yes, we're good. And then rook E4 came. And these are one of the moments, once again, that shocker move that you're not prepared for, take your time. Now, for me, I had the time in the bathroom even to like mentally prepare myself for the move rook E4. And I was not surprised at all when I got to the board and I saw it being played. So I was kind of mentally already prepared. All right. So last stopping point of this game. And then we'll see one more stopping point in the very last game of the Continental Championship before we finish off this segment or this portion of our series. So this one will take 3 minutes. All right. White to play. All right. So let's approach a few ideas. So a lot of people were giving knight takes D5, which was my initial instinct when I was in the best room. I was like, maybe I'll have knight takes D5. But here, black changes the move. Oh, you guys can't hear me? Someone said mic's not working, but I think it is. Okay, so now I was like, well, black can change the move order. First of all, there's queen x d5 and then knight c3. That's everyone's main idea, and it's messy there. But at the very least, there's rook takes e2 here. Takes and takes. So this is maybe okay for white. I kind of doubt it just because we can't even play queen f3. I mean, we can, but then we lose the pawn on f4. So this does not work. Okay. And then a lot of people were just getting moves that created threats, but kind of didn't really address the very, very big threat that black has of rook AE8. And rook AE is coming, running both the knight on E3 and the knight on E2. So for example, a move like rook CD1 or rook FD1 in general would be okay, but with rook AE8 coming, we don't really have many choices here. All right, so one idea that I got was knight C3, which I'm still trying to figure out why it's bad, but it's very similar to the move that I played in the game. No one actually got this move, perhaps because I slightly implanted an idea that it would not work. But knight G3. Okay, so it seems like the knight on E2 is staying put for that move because the F4 pawn, right? It would either hang with rook takes F4, attacking the queen, or knight takes F4. With check. But on knight takes f4, we just simply go king h1, and now the rook on e4 is being threatened, the knight on f4 is being threatened, and this rook has no squares. For example, rook b4, I mean a few moves, but like I think probably bishop c3, maybe there's even better here. Maybe we can show like knight g2 or knight c2. Okay, well, rook b4 is not working. I'm pretty sure even the other moves work too. But okay, so knight e4 does work. And if rook takes f4, we have a pretty pleasant endgame after queen x d5. So queen x d5, take d5, knight d5, rook f1, rook f1, or maybe even knight takes f1. And okay, it's a pleasant endgame, but it's around equal. My opponent should have gone for this. Now, this is the reason why this was the last stopping point. Instead of going for this endgame, my opponent went kind of insane. But knight g3 actually was the only move. I'm trying to figure out why knight c3 does not work. And so you guys can try to. I'm actually gonna unmute everyone just because we're close to the end of class. But I'm trying to figure out why this one does not work. Because the idea is after rook takes e3, takes d4 is queen e4. So this is very clever. So someone gave knight c3, and I'm trying to figure out and why that's the case. I mean, some people are giving knight f4, which probably is it. But then after king h1, I don't see how this is any different. Takes, and this is, this is still the same thing. So I'm still trying to figure out what is the big deal here. Ah, 95. Okay. Yeah, 95. This one's a killer. All right. So, yeah, this one's a big killer. Oh, and the big difference is that with knight g3, after knight takes king h1, this square is covered. That's very very subtle. After takes. Oh, this actually was one of the lines I calculated. d4, knight g2. So these are very important details. Very, very important details. Okay, so this is why the game ended. After knight g3, my opponent played rook a8. I don't know why. I think you just completely missed a very, very, very key detail. After knight takes, pawn takes was immediately blitzed out. I went queen d1, and now my opponent went knight c5. Probably forgetting about the fact that I have this move queen d4. A bit unfortunate for my opponent. And actually here, he doesn't really even have a choice. I mean, queen d4 is coming no matter what, as well as queen d5, and everything is being traded off. So he probably thought after knight c5, for example, after queen e2, not a good move, knight c5, the knight gets to d3, it threatens f4, and he probably thought he had unlimited compensation here. But unfortunately, after queen d1, knight c5, boom, queen d4, okay, you went bishop g7, I took, and then played rook c2. It was just a matter of technique. Now it's a clean exchange. No knights coming to d3. And after bishop g7, f5, it's not even a matter of like conversion technique. I'm actually the one mating him. So eventually I won the game. It's a clean exchange at this point. All right. So now I did not mean to completely stop sharing. So bear with me, guys. Almost finished. One last stopping point of the event. Okay, 7.5 out of 10 now. Fairly respectable score, back up to around 2650 performance rating. And going into the last game, I once again knew that a draw secured me into the World Cup. The biggest game of my career. I mean, the previous must or quote unquote must draw got me a GM norm with a round to spare. At that point was probably the biggest game of my career. Second GM norm, really feeling the heat of the tournaments, feeling good about the chess. But finally, I have an opportunity to be one game, a draw with white against actually a lower rated, same rated. He was 2390, I was 2380. Around same rated opponent with white. Going to the last game, all I needed was a draw. You can imagine how I'm feeling, okay? I didn't even think going to the tournament that I would be even close to qualifying to the World Cup. I didn't even think going to the tournament that I would even GM norm. I wasn't feeling too good in going to the tournament. I don't know if I was sick or just kind of feeling off, but I wasn't feeling too great going to the tournament. And I'm just playing the absolutely heated of the event, best tournament of my life. All I need is a draw against someone who's not even a grandmaster with the white pieces. And you guys probably know exactly how I'm thinking and how I'm going to say now. I was obviously very content, very satisfied with that draw. Okay. And so I played it very quickly. I wouldn't say I was nervous, but I was on edge. Okay. I think it's a little bit different. I was not nervous, but I was on edge. Okay. So I was like sitting there with my cup of tea, like low key shaking, and playing very quickly. I was kind of going back to the roots, back to how I normally would play very quickly, trying to play confidently. And okay, we reached this position right here. So this one, I keep stop sharing screen. All right. So after a very, very long, and at this point, my opponent has 5 minutes, or maybe 4 or 5 minutes to my 1 hour. That's how quickly I was playing, and that's how on edge I was. I was just simply, at some point, I was just simply trying to put clock pressure on my opponent. Okay. So obviously there's a very menacing pawn. This is not a pawn on G7. This is a pawn on B2, about to be cooled. And material is equal here. And not many pieces left on the board. By the way, I'm white. So we're kind of looking at this on the flip side. Looking at this on the flip side. And trying to find out what my opponent missed, believe it or not. And so we're just trying to find I was sharing the anecdote, the story behind it, but we're actually sharing the key moment where my opponent missed the win. But with that, actually, you guys will see the trick that I had laid in terms of how I was looking to draw this position. Okay. So only one move wins here for black. Obviously, the rook on h4 is being threatened. And the pawn on b2 is 1 step away from queening. So there's a few moves that lose here, obviously, for black, but my opponent's not that bad. So you have a few choices, okay? A few choices where the rook goes. All right, you can go to h3, you can go to h2, you could even go to h1, though hopefully most of you guys will see very quickly why that one does not work, okay? So I'm going to give you guys exactly how much time my opponent had. I think it actually was 3 minutes. So I'm going to give everyone 3 minutes here. You have to choose where this rook goes. And it turns out, by the way, that we drew this game and I went to the World Cup. But it turns out the draw actually got my opponent to the World Cup. Funnily enough, I knew this because I knew one of my American compatriots would not be accepting the spot and going to the World Cup. But of course, my opponent did not know this. My opponent didn't know that one of the other Americans would decline the World Cup spot and that he would get it. So he thought it was a must win. And on top of that, believe it or not, and I knew this actually as well, a win would get him a GM norm too. So for him, he thought a win, GM norm, and a World Cup spot. A draw, nothing. All right. So that's what situation was in. For me, draw, World Cup. For him, win, World Cup, and GM norm. This was the situation. Okay. So by the way, I did offer a draw earlier. I offered 2 actually, which usually you're not supposed to do. You're not supposed to offer 2 draws in a row, but it was different. I thought it was okay because I offered a draw on move like maybe 7 very, very early on in the opening. And then I offered a draw like move 35 or so when I had an hour up on the clock. So 2 very like distinct situations. All right. Onto this position. Okay. Last stopping point of today. Onto this position. Okay. Remember, answers privately to me in the chat. Please, after I've enabled everyone chat, do not send your answers there. Send them to me privately, and you guys are going to have 3 minutes. All right. All right. So I didn't give the full 3 minutes, but I did get a lot of answers in the chat. I mean, after all, it is kind of just a 2 options move basically. And okay, so I will call on someone. The only person who actually got it. So, I mean, a lot of people gave the right answer, but since it is kind of a multiple choice, that is the nature of the problem. I will say this. Okay, this is a very dry bones endgame position, where one side clearly is the side pushing, one side clearly is the side defending. Keep in mind this frame of thought. If you're the side who's winning, you should always, always, always be aware of what the drawing ideas are. This sounds like a very basic, like prophylaxis or a very basic frame of thought, but it oftentimes is overlooked. If you're the side who's trying to win, if you're the side that's trying to draw, always, always, always be aware of what your opponent's winning ideas are. All right, just simply understand which end games you were trying to avoid, which theoretical. I'm talking about theoretical end games. Which theoretical end games you're trying to avoid, and if you're the side that's drawing, which theoretical end games you want to go for. Okay, so Austin, what did you have? Oh, sorry. There we go.
So if I was white to draw the game by force, I'd be trying to play knight d3, get rid of the passed pawn. That's the first thing. And the second thing is I want to take on g6 because I noticed that the black king is super far away from our pawn. So if we can get down to a king and a pawn versus a king and a rook, we might actually be able to draw that. So if we play rook h3, then that does not stop the plan at all. We can simply play knight to d3 check, king c3, knight takes b2. I didn't calculate rook takes e3, but I'm pretty sure white can play bishop takes g6 there and get the same idea. If king takes b2, then bishop takes g6. And I think we're like one move slow. Our king gets shouldered out, and white is able to push through the pawn, the g pawn, and make black sack the rook for it. But if we play rook h2 instead, and white tries that idea again, we can take back on b2 with the rook. So our king is one step closer to being able to stop the pawn.
Very good. Very good. That is exactly the line of thought that, I'm sorry. I'm putting it back on mute. Awesome. So that's exactly the line of thought that you need for this position. Now, unfortunately, my opponent, with time ticking down, the pressure on, he did not find this idea. But rook h3, as a lot of people had, a lot of people were just spamming rook h3 because they saw, oh, wow, I'm still going to go queen this pawn. I'm also attacking pawn h3. And a lot of people just gave this variation with king f4, g5, and they're like super excited. I'm very excited about that variation too. But unfortunately, after rook to h3, I hit him with knight to d3 check, take b2, take g6, and a draw was agreed fairly soon. Okay, so as you guys noticed, Austin had the awareness that white is trying to liquidate it as quickly as possible into that theoretical endgame with the king pawn versus the rook. Okay, with also the shouldering method in play. So if you guys are curious, look at Turetsky's Endgame Manual, King Pawn versus Rook, the shouldering method, and it's eventually how this game finished out. But with the move instead, Rook to h2, Knight d3, now King c3, takes. This king is now one step closer to this king side. So after takes, this king is now closer. We'll come to, actually no, it goes to c4, so it doesn't get shouldered out. So as quickly as possible, we'll swoop around and try to block the g pawn. Okay, so even if you don't have it fully calculated, which is very hard to do, it's very hard to fully calculate the whole entire king and pawn versus king and rook endgame. But just simply having that king one step closer, my opponent unfortunately just was not aware at all of the fact that I was going to be sacking both my knight and bishop for all the pawns on the board. Okay, so the game ended with rook h3. Now we'll flip this to my point of view. Knight to d3, takes on b2, takes on g6, takes. And now I'll very kind of quickly click through and show you guys how the shouldering method sort of works. King c3, g5, king d3, king f5. Looks kind of strange, right? Like, why wouldn't I want to go towards the queen square? But this is the shouldering method. This king is sort of using the opposition to shoulder this king out. On top of that, I even have this pawn for good measure. Rook f3 check, king e5. Once again, shouldering, king c3, king f5. Okay, I'm not going to get too fancy with it. King d5 that is a bit too much shouldering. Okay, king f6, rook f3, king back to e5, king back to f6, king to e5. There was no 3p. I think there was just some error notation. G6, king f6, g7, king f7. And okay, now the pawn queens. So there's nothing to do there. The black king is prevented from ever assisting the rook in preventing this pawn from the queen. Well, all right, that concludes the Continental Championship. I ended with a score of 8 out of 11. The best tournaments ever in my career. Hopefully not the best ever. Hopefully I have some future tournaments that were able to trump this. Overall, just a very good litmus test for my overall psychological awareness and preparation. And, there was still ups and downs. Even with my best tournament ever, I still had one loss where I clearly was not there. Even on the 2 draws that I had in very critical moments, with the draw for the GM Norm and the draw for the World Cup, I was not fully there in terms of peak psychological preparedness. So yes, that concludes the Continental Championship. Definitely the most pivotal event in my 2023 tournament experiences, which is why we took, I think it was either 3 or 4 sessions to go over these games. And so the next tournament that we'll be looking at, I haven't fully made a decision yet, but very likely will be my U.S. Junior Championship experiences. So I will finish off with this story. So very, very happy. I get 4th place in the Continental Championship, enough to qualify me to the World Cup. On my plane ride, not back home actually, to the Cherry Blossom Classic, I went immediately from this tournament to the Cherry Blossom. I think it was like the next day that I played. Probably not one of the best decisions I made. I actually did okay at Cherry Blossom, but I was very, very tired. On the plane ride there, I found out that I got the wild card for the U.S. Junior Championship. It was my last year. I'm 20 years old, so that last year, 2023, was my last U.S. Juniors, my first one and last. U.S. Juniors is a very tough tournament to get into, so a lot of my peers are very, very strong, very high rated, and so I was fortunately able to get into the U.S. Juniors, and that will be the next tournament that we will likely review. A tournament that did not turn out very well for me, a tournament that I was not in at all the best preparedness for. And we'll now see the lows even of the 2023. Overall in 2023, I gained around 100 FIDE. And so clearly it was a very strong year for me, but there still was those ups and downs, those ebbs and flows, and we'll see that next time. Okay. All right. So thank you guys. That concludes this portion of this series. I will see hopefully most of you guys in 2 weeks from now, April 22nd. Have a good rest of your night and take care.